name is Stefan Sidoulis. I'm a strength and conditioning coach, and the topic of my presentation is Team Cobra, the formula which includes Michael Jordan's athletic performance and evaluation of Team Cobra's training method. Team Cobra is a legendary coach. He trained Michael Jordan for 50 years. This book is the second edition. It was published in 2014. The first edition was published in 1990. And according to Coach Grover, advances in sports science force him to update the content. So basically, this is a product of scientific research. Now, the structure of the presentation will go through each training cycle separately. We'll briefly describe the sessions. We'll correlate with scientific research. At the end of each training cycle, we'll make suggestions. Whereas at the end of the presentation, we will conclude whether this method is effective or not. The general view of the formula. This formula is intended for ages 15 and up with a minimal experience in weights. The duration of the formula is 3 months, whereas the duration of each training cycle is 1 month. It's based on linear periodization model with 3-to-1 loading paradigm. The athlete during the 4th week doesn't perform any workouts at all. The pillars of this workout are static stretching, complex training, and pre-exhaustion. The author suggests 4 workouts per week, 2 for the lower body and 2 for the upper body. The first phase is called fire, and the objectives are to strengthen the tendons and the ligaments. So basically, we would say that this is an anatomical adaptation phase. For the lower body, the author suggests a pre-exhaustion exercise. The athlete rests for 1 minute, and then perform isometric hold lasting 60 seconds and reaching up 2 minutes in the 3rd week. And immediately after, performs dynamic movements, and at the end of the sequence, performs static stretching. The athlete rests for 2 minutes, performs the sequence for 3 more times, and the total number of sequences is 5 for the lower body. For the upper body, we have only isometric contractions, which last 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 60 seconds, 60 seconds, and 90 seconds for the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd week, respectively. Now, the first line shows a sequence which starts with a pre-exhaustion exercise and ends with static stretching, whereas in the second line, we see all the exercise performed. Now, we have the exercise for the upper body, where the athlete performs isometric push-ups, isometric pull-ups, overhead press, exercise for the biceps, for the triceps, and plank variations. Now, what does science tell us about pre-exhaustion? According to Coach Grover, pre-exhaustion is very important to activate the glutes before a multi-joint exercise. And this is in accordance with the theory as it was developed by Joe Wilder in the West, when a single joint exercise preceding a multi-joint exercise may engage the primary nervous system further. However, research on the neuromuscular activity indicates different results. Augustin et al. Examined the EMG activity of the rectus femoris, vastus lateralis, and gluteus maximus on the leg press exercise under 2 conditions: a pre-exhaustion condition and without pre-exhaustion. And the pre-exhaustion exercise they used was a leg extension, performed to fatigue, and the results indicated that when a pre-exhaustion was used before the leg press, the EMG activity of the vastus lateralis and the rectus femoris was decreased. And they concluded that as a method it is ineffective. However, a different research, which also examined the efficacy of pre-exhaustion exercise in the upper body, found an increased EMG activity of the pectoralis major, anterior deltoids, anterior serratus, and triceps brachii. However, there are limitations to this research. The critique is that they used lighter loads, they didn't take them to fatigue, and probably this led to post-interventional dissociation rather than pre-exhaustion. The conclusion is that several researches are conducted on pre-exhaustion, however, that they use different methodologies, and it is very difficult to draw a final conclusion. However, most of them converge to the same result, which is that pre-exhaustion actually enhances the activation of the synergies, but not the activation of the prime movements, and it is effective for muscular hypertrophy. Now, what does science tell us about isometrics? Isometrics became quite popular in the 50s when Hatcher and Miller claimed that 6 seconds of isometrics performed daily for 10 weeks may enhance strength performance by 5%, and this triggered a chain of reaction in the field of research. According to Professor Berkosavsky, we have 2 types of isometrics: exposed isometric regime and non-exposed isometric regime. However, nowadays you know very well that dynamic exercises exhibit a higher transfer to dynamic performance. Although there are researches on isometrics which claim an increased performance in jumping, sprinting, and sport-related tasks. Now, what does science tell us about isometrics? Scott et al. Examined the effect of isometric contractions relation on strength performance. The protocol that they used was intermittent contractions for the right leg and continuous contraction for the left leg. The participants trained for 40 weeks, and the results, as you see from the graph on the right-hand side, revealed a greater strength gains for the continuous contractions protocol. And the authors concluded that this was attributed to different metabolites concentrations. However, there are limitations to this research. For instance, the sample size is very small, whereas the participants didn't have any training background. More research are conducted on the isometric contractions duration. So Young et al. Found that intermittent contractions duration, isometric contractions, leading to greater strength, maximum strength performance, whereas a continuous contraction protocol enhances muscular endurance. Haber et al. Found that long duration isometrics and short duration isometrics didn't have any difference in muscular endurance, but short duration isometrics were superior for enhancing maximum strength. The conclusion: if we use isometrics are appropriate for enhancing muscular endurance. However, inappropriate application may lead to fatigue, loss of coordination, speed of movement, and elasticity, which I believe is the case in Tim Gover's work. Isometric endurance is important in sports like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, mixed martial arts, judo, rock climbing, where static muscular endurance is prevalent, but not for sport disciplines like soccer or basketball. Now, the theory behind dynamic movement. This theory was developed by Seyama in 1990, who claimed that dynamic movement performed in reduced range of motion enhances the contact capacity of the slow twitch fibers. We know that heavy resistance training and power training recruits many motor units but trains only the fast twitch fibers. Now, what is the theory behind this method? The contraction relaxation phase allows adequate blood flow to enter in slow twitch fibers, which doesn't enhance the accumulation of lactic acid and hydrogen ions. We know that hydrogen ions are responsible for increasing the pulse in membranes, thus permitting the penetration of anabolic hormones into the cell. And this is exactly the mechanism we're looking for in this method. However, Zabitalt suggests that this method is not appropriate for junior athletes. It's intended only for experienced athletes and no more than 2 times per week. Now, what does science tell us about static stretching? Static stretching, it's traditionally believed that static stretching improves performance and protects from injuries. However, research indicates different results. Now, what does science tell us about isometrics? Bauman and Kawati conducted a meta-analysis. They gathered the research, the 43 researchers, and they found that most of them converged to the same conclusion, which is that static stretching actually compromises strength performance. However, most of these researchers use multiple sets of long duration, which probably doesn't reflect practices adopted by many athletes. Whereas we're interested in Nelson and Conan examined the dose-response relationship between static stretching and strength performance. And they found that even a single set of static stretching lasting no more than 30 seconds may decrease the force output by 6.4%. Now, something which is not well known among coaches is that static stretching may actually lead to fatigue. And this is attributed to several mechanisms like a decreased force transmission, reduced oxygen supply, which impairs metabolic byproduct removal. It elevates intracellular calcium ions, and actually it may lead to glycogen depletion. Conclusion: when athletes and coaches wish to maximize force production, this static stretching should be avoided. Whereas if isometrics are included in the session which stiffen the muscles, then dynamic stretching should be preferred over static stretching. Now, suggestions of the first training cycle. I believe that circuit training is more appropriate for beginners, where some manipulation of the tempo, slow eccentrics actually enhances collagen synthesis. The duration, 2 to 4 weeks, is appropriate for experienced athletes, but for less experienced athletes, this training cycle should definitely be extended. For the upper body, I strongly suggest weight-bearing single arm variations, which prepare the athlete to withstand the destabilizing torque and maintain postural integrity. Now, the second phase is called force, and the goal is to maximize the maximum strength. For the lower body, again, the athlete starts with a pre-exhaustion exercise, followed by 30 seconds of isometric contractions, which decrease to 10 seconds at the end of the third week, and immediately after performs 10 repetitions. Rest for 1 minute or less, and then plyometrics follow the sequence. The sequence again ends in static stretching. For the upper body, we have the first week 30 seconds, isometric hold, 60 seconds the second week, and 90 seconds the third week, whereas the number of concentric repetitions is 10. The rest interval and the number of sequences remains the same. Now, each line presents a different sequence. We start with the static stretching, with a pre-exhaustion exercise, and ends with the static stretching, whereas the arrow indicates the plyometrics. Now, complex training. According to Coach Grover, complex training is very important because it enhances a multi-dimensional powerful triple extension. At the same time, the author completely disregards the separation of resistance exercises and plyometrics, and he found them completely inappropriate. What does science tell us about complex training? The basis of complex training is post-activation potentiation. Complex training actually allows the athlete to perform a power exercise, allows the athlete to amend the training stimulus by performing the exercise, as I said, the ballistic exercise with more power. However, there are limitations. There are several factors which affect the post-activation potentiation. For instance, athletes with greater relative strength exhibit higher potential for post-activation potentiation. Specifically, athletes in back squat 1.7 times or 2 times their back squat should use this method definitely. Or the experience is also very important because probably experienced athletes have better international coordination. On the other hand, a meta-analysis on the rest interval found that short rest intervals lasting between 0 and 3 minutes have a negative or a small size effect. And let's remember that it goes just 1 minute and less. Now, this graph depicts the force time curve of an athlete performing an explosive lift. The explosive strength is comprised of the static strength and the acceleration strength, and it is developed exclusively under isometric conditions. This highlights not only the triphasic nature of muscular contraction, but also the importance of including some kind of isometics in our training regime. And I think Professor Bekosowski gives clear guidelines as how to implement isometics if the goal is to improve maximum strength. So, Bekosowski suggests that the duration should not exceed 5 or 6 seconds. The intensity and the rate of force development should be explosive. The athlete should perform no more than 5 reps, and the rest interval should be between 4 and 6 minutes. Now, this picture is table from Turner and Stewart is quite informative because it guides the training process according to the level of athleticism of each practitioner. So, novices may benefit more by lifting 50 to 60% of 1 rep, whereas experienced athletes should lift heavier. As far as concerns complex training, it's more of a, if we use the classical model where resistance exercise precedes the plyometric exercise, I think this method is more appropriate for stronger athletes since they have the capacity to recruit higher flexible motor units. Now, if we use complex training in less experienced athletes, then the listed competencies are perhaps more appropriate. So, double deadlift swings or weighted jump squats before a ballistic exercise yield similar results, and they're considered equally effective. However, more research is required, and we are really looking forward to reading more papers on this scientific field. And one more last thing about static stretching. When the exercises are performed in full range of motion, then flexibility is not compromised, it remains the same or it is increased. So it is completely unnecessary to perform static stretching at this training cycle. Now, the third phase is called flight. The load is slightly increased. For the lower body, the athlete performs 30 seconds maximum reps, followed by plyometrics, whereas for the upper body, it performs 30 seconds of maximum reps without, and this is it. Now, so basically, this is a power endurance phase. What does science tell us about power endurance? According to Boba and Buccicelli, power endurance is divided into 2 categories: power endurance short and power endurance long. The selection depends exclusively on the physiological demands of the sport. So, intermediate sport like soccer and basketball would benefit more from power endurance short, and the author suggests class sets, whereas a 200-meter sprinter who wishes to maintain the power output for longer time would benefit more for power endurance long. Now, more considerations on jump attack. How about jumping mechanics? We know that different exercises exhibit a different degree of dynamic correspondence. So, athletes from different sports adapt different jumping mechanics. So, a knee-dominant athlete would benefit more from a push jack, whereas a hip-dominant athlete would benefit more from a jump squat. The worst thing about this method is the one-size-fits-all approach of Tim Grover, who considers that this method is appropriate for anyone, and it violates basic principles of sports science, like those of individualization and progressive overload. Sports science doesn't give recipes. It shows us how to evaluate individual needs before we design our workout, and this is why I consider it completely unacceptable. Now, there are more issues about the technique. For instance, I don't understand why the athlete, while performing the RDL, has to lean forward instead of hip hinge, or I don't understand why the athlete, when performing this complex, has to find himself in such position. Where are the biomechanical similarities with the Bulgarian squat? Probably nowhere. According to Coach Grover, this formula is appropriate for enhancing a powerful triple extension in all planes of motion. However, all the exercises are performed in the sagittal plane, and the question is, where is the transfer? And one more final question, where are the references? This is supposed to be the product of scientific research, so it would be really helpful if the references were included, so we would evaluate the sources of Tim Grover, the source that he used to write this formula. All in all, I think that Coach Grover's philosophy is summarized in the following phrase: you don't get extraordinary results by doing the same program everyone else is doing. However, my answer to that is to keep Cunningham squat. Ordinary things consistently done create extraordinary results. Thank you for watching.